Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Podcast Boys. I am joined by Connor Nielsen. Connor, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about yourself, Comics Kid?
I'm doing just swell. Today, we are talking about the movie Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. This is a sequel to a movie we have already talked about on this podcast. What we do around here, we talk about movies and TV shows with connections to Twin Peaks. And our connection here, just like with the previous Fantastic Four movie, is screenwriter Mark Frost. Connor, why don't you tell us a little bit about this movie that you chose for us to talk about?
So Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer is, in fact, as you said, a sequel, and it brings back the principal cast. Ioan Gruffudd plays Mr. Fantastic, Jessica Alba as the Invisible Woman. We also have Chris Evans and Michael Chiklis in there, playing the Human Torch and the Thing, respectively. Also bringing back Julian McMahon as Dr. Doom. Tim Story returns to direct. Mark Frost gets a co-story credit and a co-screenplay credit. And it tells the story of the Silver Surfer, who is the Herald of Galactus. He is making his way through the cosmos, readying planets for destruction. Then he arrives on Earth. And as this is happening, Mr. Fantastic and Invisible Woman are getting ready for their big celebrity superhero wedding.
Woohoo!
And things just aren't going as well as things are going. There's a hitch, is what I'm saying. All right, and Jessica Alba just wants Mr. Fantastic conform to what she wants, even though she's not telling him what he wants at all. And Mr. Fantastic is just incapable of owning a planner, and other stuff is happening too. And then eventually, the Silver Surfer's intentions are known to the Fantastic Four, and they team up with the military to try to stop him. And then while this is happening, Dr. Doom is somehow still alive from the first movie, and he has plans and machinations of his own. Approximately 101 minutes. How did you feel about this movie, Comics Kid?
I think I liked it about as much as the previous movie. I think it has some of the same problems as that one. Also, it is able to avoid some of the problems I had with that one, while still managing to keep roughly the same amount of quality throughout, for good or for bad. Connor, I could sense a little bit of your vitriol seeping through as you were plot synopsising. So what did you think of this movie?
If I had to describe this movie in 4 words, it would be colossally stupid, immensely boring. Wow. So I'd not seen this movie before. I think we talked about this the last time we talked about one of these Fantastic Four movies. These were coming out when I was growing up. I remember the marketing of these movies. I remember when these movies came out. For whatever reason, never saw them. I still have not seen the Ang Lee Hulk movie. I still have not seen Daredevil or Ghost Rider. But I'm making progress. I have seen the Hellboy movies. I've seen now I've seen both of these Fantastic Four movies. So the 2000s era, that decade, the pre-Dark Knight, pre-Iron Man era of superhero movies is a bit of a blind spot for me. But I am catching up. But man, this one was rough. I see what you mean, because last time when I picked this, you said you didn't ever plan on picking this because you didn't know what you would say regarding this movie that you wouldn't have said regarding like the first movie. Mm-hmm. And you're right. And I understand where you're coming from too, because this is a very consistent movie, tonally speaking. With that first movie, it's paced similarly. Any positives I have about this movie, I could just attribute as well to the first movie, because I think it does kind of come across in like tone and appreciation for the material. But I think as far as negatives go, I have rarely seen characters in a major studio movie as dumb as the characters in this movie. That general guy, what? Yeah, so that's kind of my general thoughts, pardon the pun.
Sorry, I was way too late on the reaction there. Where do you want to start with this? Do we want to start by talking about our Twin Peaks connection?
Yeah, that's a good place to start.
Okay, so like, I don't know if you know this, but X-Men First Class, there is a story by credit by a man named Sheldon Turner, and my understanding is he didn't actually have much of anything to do with making the X-Men First Class movie, but he had written a screenplay for an X-Men Origins Magneto, and there are a couple of vaguely common elements between his screenplay and what ended up happening in X-Men First Class, and so he gets basically a courtesy credit in X-Men First Class. And when you had told me some months ago that Mark Frost is credited as a writer in both of these Fantastic Four movies, I was very shocked. I kind of thought, well, maybe what happened with the first one was they had been trying for like 8 years to make a Fantastic Four movie, and you had like 3 different screenplays come in, and then Tim Story would say, okay, I like this, and I like this, and now we're just going to kind of combine these and use bits and pieces, and so like Mark Frost is credited, but he might not have actually been heavily involved. But then I think we talked about this a little bit when we talked about the first one. He was involved. He was, very much part of the writing process. But then I don't know why, but it's just hard for me to imagine that he was also involved with this one. I guess in my mind, I'm still imagining that he was like, part of an earlier revision of the screenplay for the first one and then kind of wasn't involved with the final product. But like, it's still really weird to me thinking about like he was involved with Twin Peaks, and whether you love or hate Twin Peaks, like at its best and at its worst, it is very much a new and original kind of thing. It does not have much of anything in common with a big, loud summer blockbuster of superhero intellectual property. And so it's still like, as we are, starting this podcast, I'm still having trouble wrapping my brain around Mark Frost was involved with this in any capacity.
Yes. So I can't remember how much of the writing process I talked about in the first one, because I did look this up. Now I'm gonna be the guy between the two of us where you hear the finger keys clicking.
Adding to the lore of the podcast boys.
Yeah.
Experience.
Somebody asked, did comics and superhero stories help formulate your views on storytelling? He said, I was a big Marvel character as a kid. I guess that's not a typo. I read a few DC books as well, but they were kind of like the Democrat and Republican Party of comics. We didn't have all the great indie labels that have sprung up since then. Marvel, in the way, was the upstart. DC had been around for a couple of decades before. I identify pretty strongly with the Marvel brand and identify with their whole stable of characters. This is from earlier in the interview. When asked, you worked on the Fantastic Four films. What's it like working with someone else's character and a pre-established story and adding your own story to that? To which Mark Frost said, the first movie was a lot fun. Okay, either Mark Frost speaks like a 5-year-old, or this interview is
this
full
interview
of
was conducted in the Red Room.
The first movie was a lot fun. Okay, I'm just gonna read it as written, and I'm not gonna try to wrap my head around the phonetics of it. Okay. The first movie was a lot fun because I'd collected Fantastic Four as a kid and had a lot of affections for. So they were stories I was very familiar with. The studio had tried to develop the thing for about 10 years, and it had fallen flat and gone in all sorts of different directions. I kind of steered them back to the original conceptions, the original ideas, the point. In a way, it was like working with old friends. These were characters I'd known for 40 years. It was a little different than working with an adaptation that was brand new to me, with characters I didn't know. The second movie never really had much of a chance. It had kind of been backwards development where they had named a release date, but they didn't have a movie to go out on that day. The second movie is a bit less effective than the first one, but that was a little different than a straight adaptation. These characters have been around for so long that they almost, in our collective unconscious of pop culture, so isn't that difficult. It sounds to me like with the first movie, there was like a bunch of lingering ideas and concepts and like different plans, and maybe at different points in time, like different screenplays for a Fantastic Four movie. And then they brought him in, and maybe they already had like a director and all that kind of ready to go. And then, so he sort of came in to, on the screenplay front, just kind of manage everything, because when I was looking into that first Fantastic Four movie, he's like the only person who has anything positive to say about working on it. And it kind of makes sense to me because it sounds like he was allowed to have some creativity of what the vision of that movie should have been like. Like, okay, here's what we're doing. It's got to be an origin story. This has got to be the general shape of it, and this is kind of how they get their powers. This is how you update it for the 21st century, and this is how you do whatever. And this is probably what the dynamic between the characters should be. He got his paycheck, and he got to like buy a new house or something. And then it sounds like Tim's story and like a lot of the cast really had a problem kind of fighting the studio on what their creative decisions were going to be within that framework. And I think like that screenplay did get changed as they were filming it. And I'm sure Mark Frost was like, I don't really care. Like that's screenwriting. And what it sounds like with this movie is that Mark Frost was now in the position that everybody else was in that first movie, where he didn't like it because he had no creative freedom. He was just kind of told, here's what you need to do. You need to give us a movie by X date. And then I think after he was done with his work, somebody else then came in and cleaned it up the way he had to come in and clean up other people's previous work on the first movie. These movies, these two Fantastic Four movies, sound kind of like a pain to work on. And we know that like I don't know if we're going to continue the meter of how awful Fan Four Stick is from the first movie or from the first video we did regarding the first movie, but like even with the unbelievably terrible Fan Four Stick movie, like that was also one where the studio kept fighting like the creative process of like the people trying to make it as well. And so I'm just like wondering what it is about this property and this studio that makes it like difficult for people to work on. Does that clear up anything? Because
yes,
we're talking about Mark Frost.
It does. Looking at Internet Movie Database, here is there's almost more writers than actors on this thing. Don Payne and Mark Frost did the screenplay, and then John Turman and Mark Frost are credited with the story, and then Stan Lee and Jack Kirby did characters. So that it's weird to me. One thing that sticks out to me in that interview you were reading is where he said, I don't think the second movie ever really had a chance. Because to me, the origin is already done. You've already set up these characters and introduced them to a general audience. And so now, I would think, being someone who didn't work on either of these movies, that the second one would be a whole lot easier. And what you said makes a lot of sense about how his position is kind of different in this one than it was in the first one. But I would think that now that you've already introduced these characters and this kind of, like, in 2005, 2007, like, the world, we weren't sure if the world was going to be ready for like a giant man in a toga that goes around eating planets. Nowadays it's a given that people will accept a talking raccoon and a talking tree. Like, you can just throw everything that's weird in comics at a movie and chances are people will eat it up with a spoon. But 15 years ago, we weren't sure if that was the case. Or when I say we, I mean like the people making these movies. But it's weird to me that he said, I didn't think the second one really had much of a chance, because I would think like, okay, yeah, the first one made enough that they're willing to do a sequel, so this one's going to be a slam dunk. Like, we might not get a sequel, but people already know the Fantastic Four, the team is already together, so now we can just tell a story. And then, what story you choose to tell is up to you, but like, I think that's kind of where the movie starts to stumble a little bit, in my opinion, because in the same way that the first movie, they get their powers pretty early in the movie, and then there's one action scene on a bridge, and then it's an entire movie of them just kind of hanging around the Baxter Building, and then one big action scene at the end. This movie, it has more action scenes, and I feel like it's a little more evenly paced, but there's still very little going on in this movie. It still feels like, okay, very early on, our characters find out, okay, there's these anomalies happening. There's snow in Egypt, and like over here the water is freezing and stuff like that. There are these anomalies, and the Fantastic Four find out about it pretty early on, and then it's a whole lot of like every character kind of stumbling into each other until we get to the end of the movie where they finally take care of the problem. And so in that way, even though there are more action scenes and there's more exciting stuff happening than like Johnny is pranking the Thing and Johnny goes and does some motorbike stuff at the the carnival thing, like even though there's more exciting stuff than that, it still feels like it's following the same formula of, okay, very early in Act 1, our characters find out what's going on, and then stretch everything out, and then they take care of everything in the last 5 or 10 minutes of the movie.
I appreciate that pun. That was a good one.
You may not believe me, but that was not intentional. But yeah, that's why I was saying that, like, this movie feels like it's kind of, in some ways, it's learned from the mistakes of the first one, but in some ways it still feels like it is making the same mistakes. And so, like, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I do feel like there are more exciting things that happen, but, like, in the first one, you and I were both just very confused about, like, character motivation and, like, what is happening in, with this character in their mind. And I get a lot of that in this movie as well, and I think you do too. And so, like, there's a whole lot of, like, in some ways, like I said, I feel like we're talking about the first movie, but in other ways, it's like, no, this does feel like an improvement, but it's like in Jurassic Park 2 when Malcolm says, oh, you learned from your mistakes and you're making a whole bunch of new ones. Like, that's kind of what I'm getting here.
You had mentioned that there's actually not a whole lot happening in this plot. And you're absolutely right. I remember when I was recapping the movie, I was saying, oh, yeah, there's a Silver Surfer. I just kind of had to explain kind of a little bit of the premise and the backstory. And then I'm like, oh, now we're in, like, the middle of approaching the end of Act 2. Like, oh, there's really not a whole lot. So, yeah, where do you want to go from here, Comics Kid? Because I don't, like, there is so much here that I think is wrong. And I don't know where to start. This is kind of like one of those things where in my head, every one problem is just kind of leaned on top of the next problem, which is leaned on top of the next problem. And it, like, kind of forms a big problem circle. It's like, where's your point of entry? You know what I mean? Like, where do we start? Do you want to start with, like, the awful Invisible Woman?
Sure.
Do you want to talk about the vacant Mr. Fantastic? Do you want to talk about the world's stupidest general, or do you want to talk about Doctor Doom? Like we could really start anywhere.
Yeah, let's go with the Invisible Woman, I guess, because for, like, half or a fourth of this movie, the plot is Reed and Sue are trying to get married, and it's crazy to me how, like, in the first one, they spent over half the movie trapped in their home, and, like, we can't leave because, if we go outside, question mark. But in this one, it's like, we're so busy all the time. Like, we had a thing where there were 2 squad cars that got crushed, and, like, I go outside and 10 million people are taking my photo, and it's like, I get it. Like, in the comics, they're celebrity, like, superhero scientist people, explorers, but when did this happen? Like, I guess, they want to get a little closer to how it is in the comics, and that's fine. And so Sue wants to have, like, her dream wedding. And if we have some listeners who are married and who had a beautiful wedding, like, good on you. I have never gotten married. I'm gonna say, if I found the love of my life, I'm gonna say that the wedding would probably be less important than having an actual good marriage, for the rest of my life. And so I've never really understood, like, oh, it has to be perfect. It has to have, the flowers have to be perfect, and the dishes have to, and that's what Sue is worried about. And then so she's complaining to Alicia Masters about how, like, we live in a media circus. There's always people, like, prying into our lives. So then
I thought you were about to say we live in a society. And then she asked Alicia, because she's blind, who's gonna give you a reach around?
Oh, yeah. But Sue, she's complaining about how, like, we don't have privacy, and how can you raise a family in a world like this? But then she plans an outdoor wedding, and she publicly announces it to everyone. Like, in the opening scenes of the movie, newspapers are saying, it's the wedding of the century, or my buddy's getting married and it's gonna be, and so, like, and I'm like, you didn't have to do this. You could have invited, like, your very closest friends. Don't tell anyone outside of this building, and then just have your private wedding where helicopter people aren't screaming at you through a megaphone. But that's your fault for planning an outdoor wedding like this, where, oh, like, let's see what's going on over there. Oh, it's Sue and Reed. Like, yeah, hey, go guys, you're gonna have a great marriage. And then I'm not the first one to talk about, like, the hypocrisy where she's angry at Reed for having a bachelor party, and yeah, he's getting weird with it at his bachelor party. But then she says, yeah, it's nothing compared to my bachelorette party. And it's like, okay, so then why were you mad at him? But yeah, like basically
Ugh.
Sue's character arc is she wants to have a wedding, and then for half-ish of the movie, she and Reed are contemplating leaving the Fantastic Four and just being regular people. But because at the end of the movie, because air quotes, they took care of this problem together, and I'm gonna have to talk more about that later, then they can't break up the team because I guess the world will fall apart if the Fantastic Four isn't all together. And so at the end, it's like, yeah, we can have a kid and raise him in this environment. And so that's her character arc. Connor, take it away. What's wrong with everything?
So you really hit a lot of the nails on the coffin of Sue Storm. You're right. She like I don't. Okay, so I got a question. Like, what does Sue like? What does she want to do? What's her deal? Like,
Hmm.
to me, it does sort of. She comes across as somebody who doesn't really care about being a superhero all that much.
Hmm.
She does be a superhero because this is a Fantastic Four movie, and one of the four members of the Fantastic Four is Invisible Woman. Yay! She makes herself invisible, makes force fields, crap like that. Okay, great. But whenever she's not in an action scene, she never talks about saving the world. She never talks about wanting to help people. She never talks about what it's like and the pressures of being a superhero. She never talks about any of that. And then on top of that, she doesn't have any other job. Like, she's not a scientist. Like, in the last movie, she was right.
I I
She
think
was a
so.
secretary or something.
Or
And
like
but
she was something because she seemed to be like in charge of Victor's science division, I thought.
yeah,
So yeah,
and so it's just weird because in this movie, she seems to have no interests whatsoever, and she's just this cruel woman who just sits around her fancy penthouse living space, and then just kind of is a bossy, stern, mother type that just kind of looks at the boys and gives them a a stink eye, and and scolds them occasionally. It's like, what? Like, this is your character? Like, I understand 60s comic books weren't exactly the apex
hmm
of female representation, but since the 1960s we've been doing okay. You know what I'm saying?
hmm
I think you can, just because these movies are based on characters created in the 1960s, and you can reach into that nice big grab bag of Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, you can pull from other places too, right? You can say, this is one part of the premise that maybe hasn't aged as well as the other, because from what I understand, in those early issues, Sue was kind of the team mom,
hmm
right? That's what I
Yeah.
hear, and makes sense. That's just kind of the era in which it was made, and okay, cool. But it's at the beginning of this movie when the Marvel logo is going by, you see drawings from Grant Morrison and Jay Lee's 1, 2, 3, 4. I
Mm.
think that came out before this movie came out.
Yeah.
But there's definitely drawings from Mike Wieringo when he did his run with Mark Waid, and there's all these other drawings that are just flashing by, and I'm thinking yeah, there is a long history with these characters. Why are we not pulling from anything else? And that's where I think a lot of this movie kind of fumbles, specifically with Sue, is that it does feel so dated. I'm sure this felt dated in '07, but it feels really dated now. But regarding the wedding, which I don't know if it's because Jessica Alba was a big name in 2007, it feels like the wedding is the entire first act of the movie, just because it kind of mostly centers around Jessica Alba, and you know what I mean. It's this gives her something to do, and it's not really something to do. It's just kind of something to occupy her screen time and kind of put her front and center. And then once the wedding's kind of done, she really does nothing until Vin Diesel with the voice of Lawrence Fishburne says, "Hey, what's going on, family, baby?" And so I don't. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I'm rambling right now, but
You've raised a good point because in the '60s, you're right. You know, while the Fantastic Four was felt to be very forward thinking, and it was like this is an innovation. Like, we've never seen anything like this before. And 3 of your characters, you can assign them like archetypal personality traits. Reed is the stern but confident leader, and he knows science stuff, and that's his role in this book. And the Thing, he's gruff, but he's also got a heart of gold, and he's the best friend. And he was, I don't remember when this was established, but he was a pilot in World War II, and so like that's part of he's known Reed all this time. And then Johnny, he's the hothead of the group, and he's kind of there to poke at the Thing a little bit. And but they've also kind of got a big brother little brother kind of thing. And like you said, Sue was teen mom, and she didn't really have personality, and that I feel like is kind of true for most of the Marvel books in the 60s, with the possible exception of Spider-Man, where you had more than one woman in the series, and so they were kind of forced to give each woman a different and unique personality. But in X-Men, Jean Grey was woman, and in Hulk, Betty Brant was woman, and in the Ant-Man and the Wasp was woman. And so like that is a problem with the Marvel stuff from the 60s. And with the Fantastic Four, one thing I have kind of noticed in the stuff that I've dabbled in is that a lot of people, they'll say in interviews like, I love the Fantastic Four, and my goal is to try and kind of take things back to how Stan and Jack did things. And like they're always like, I want to pay homage to how those guys did it back in the 60s. And so the Fantastic Four, maybe this has changed a little bit in the last 15 years, but it feels like this is a concept that can never really grow past what was already done with it in the 60s, because everyone I've ever seen, they're like, they talk about how they want to kind of pay homage to what those guys did in their run. And so this series is kind of like, it can grow and change a little bit and then refresh, and then you start back over. I've talked before about how like Johnny Storm feels much more mature and level-headed in the John Byrne run in the 80s than he does in the Mark Waid, Mike Wieringo run. And I love the Mark Waid, Mike Wieringo run, but it feels like they were saying, let's go back to how things were done in the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby days. And so we have to take Johnny back to being a hot-headed teenager type. And so to make a long point somewhat shorter, Sue, I feel like, is the teen mom because that's what everyone is familiar with from the old comics. And if you try to go much more forward, and I'm not an expert on the Fantastic Four by any means, but at least in what I've read, it feels like every other creative team that followed, they are still kind of like echoing what Stan Lee and Jack Kirby did, and Sue isn't allowed to grow and become her own character beyond being the teen mom.
Yes, okay. It sounds like those making this movie maybe had that same idea that they have a lot of nostalgia for that, early era stuff. And yeah, they kind of run into the same problems that a lot of other people run into. It's a cyclical error with the Fantastic Four. So I got a question.
Okay.
So when it comes to this movie, I like, because this kind of plays into what you were talking about with like, going back to how Stan and Jack did it. So a lot of the concepts and premises for scenes and ideas, like there's a lot here that I want to give the benefit of the doubt, because I didn't really turn on this movie until like 20 minutes in. We have like the idea of like a superhero wedding, and the idea of, oh, here's a plot device where if anybody touches the Human Torch, they swap powers. And you have like little concepts like that. Oh, we gotta team up with a bad guy. Like these are all things I could see in a 1960s comic book.
Yeah.
And these feel like these would be like fun concepts that the Fantastic Four have to deal with while like they're fighting another bad guy in an issue, and it becomes something else. So I think those are fun concepts to put in your Fantastic Four movie. I just think everything in the execution leaves a lot to be desired. So like, how do you feel about like all of those things? Because I think they kind of come across as disparate elements that could have been kind of fun, but like, do you think that those are things that should have just been taken out of the movie entirely and like given like actual kind of story, or do you think that it needed more of those kind of gags, or like where are you at on those?
Okay, so the team up with Victor, I do not like. I don't really think Victor serves any purpose in this story. I think you very easily could have taken him out and fleshed out some of the other stuff in the story, because this is a very short movie. Credits and all, this is an hour and 30 minutes. And I'm one of those people, when I see that a movie's 2.5 hours long, I already am like groaning and looking if I can just like quietly leave, because like 2.5 hours, in my opinion, is pushing it. But an hour and a half is not enough time, I don't think. I think this really could have been longer, and we could have had some more story, like you said, because once they find out, oh, there's this thing causing the anomalies, no pun intended on the word thing, and then there's like 3 different attempts to like catch the Silver Surfer, and they keep messing it up, and then like they're imprisoned. And like, to get back to what you were asking, the thing where they're like, again, no pun intended, where they're they all, when you touch Johnny, you swap powers. I think if that was in like one issue of a monthly comic book, I would like it. But when you get a movie featuring the Fantastic Four, I want all of them to have something to do in the climax. But Johnny, he's the only one who goes and punches on Doom a little bit. And Doom is not even your secondary antagonist. He's your tertiary antagonist. And then, after Johnny beats up Doom and gives the surfboard back to the Silver Surfer, then your secondary antagonist goes and beats up the main antagonist, and all Johnny does is he pushes the board a little bit. And Reed and Sue look lovingly into each other's eyes, and Ben, he gets in a crane and then like pushes a button and then knocks Doom down, and I'm getting Vietnam flashbacks to the Amazing Spider-Man movie. And like, no, the team doesn't get to do anything here. This becomes the Johnny Storm hour in the final moments of the movie, and this would be fine if you had 12 issues a year, and in one issue, Johnny gets all the powers, and then he goes and does something, and meanwhile, Reed is thinking, and Sue is, making an apple pie, and Ben, he's, playing poker at Yancey Street, and then, like, at the end of the issue, everything's back to normal. And then in the next issue, maybe Sue is central to the conflict being solved. But when you only get, we've had 3 or 4 Fantastic Four movies, depending on if you want to count the 1990s Roger Corman one, then you want, every time you do get a Fantastic Four movie, you want everyone to be central in taking care of this problem. And maybe you could say, like, well, Reed did some stuff that was central to defeating the villain earlier in the movie. He's the one who built the pulse thing, and Sue's the one who gave him the idea for the pulse. And, Ben, bless his heart, he barely gets anything to do in this movie. Like, even if you dislike the character arc that Reed and Sue and Johnny all have, at least they have something, and I say that with a question mark at the end. But Ben doesn't have anything. So again, a long point short, I on paper, I don't mind the idea of like their powers get swapped and they all have to deal with that a little bit, but I don't like how it's handled. I don't like the idea of them teaming up with Doctor Doom in this movie. Maybe that could have been made to work. In the comics, there have been times where Doctor Doom has teamed up with the heroes. I'm thinking of like in the Axis storyline a few years ago, where the Red Skull had Professor Xavier's powers. Dr. Doom was helping the heroes fight the Red Skull, and he was kind of part of the idea of what if we invert his moral compass or whatever. And so, like, there are times where Doom will say, okay, I understand that, like, it's time for me to put my grudge with the Fantastic Four aside, and we're going to work together to fight a larger threat. But it is not handled very well at all in this movie, and I feel like they were just like, well, Doctor Doom is like one of the 3 Fantastic Four bad guys that are marketable, so we have to have him here, even though like he was dealt with in the first movie, and he does less here than he did in the first one. And in the first one, basically he just sits in his office and watches the Fantastic Four on his computer screen. I don't like it because he wants to steal the surfboard and get the surfer's powers, and then what? They even tell him the board is drawing Galactus to this world. And I don't think they ever say Galactus' name. I think they just call him the Destroyer. But they say the board is drawing the Destroyer here. You need to give the surfboard back. And then Doom just says no. And then they fight him a little bit, and then they give the surfboard back, and then the surfer is able to destroy Galactus. And what was the point? What is Victor's endgame here? What is he trying to do? Does he want to take over the world? He's running from them, so he doesn't want revenge on the Fantastic Four. What is he doing? What is he doing in this movie? Why is he here? None of this. I didn't like that. And like in the X-Men movies, I felt like they seeded it a little better that Magneto, he was once friends with Charles, but in these movies, I don't get the feeling that Reed and Victor were ever friends. I get the feeling they were acquaintances who worked together, but they never really liked each other. And so it doesn't work for, like, just from ground one. It does not work trying to team him up with the heroes here.
Yeah, so you said a lot there. I'm going to try to respond to some of it.
Sorry.
So backtracking. No, you're fine. So you're right. Ben has basically nothing to do in this movie, but his very first scene, something happens that is so alarming and concerning. Like, it makes me think about the inner logic of this cartoon world. He is like taking two of his fingers and like rubbing them together, and that's making like little rocks and sand fall from his fingers, so like little kids can have it. It's like you're giving these children basically dead pieces of yourself as a souvenir for meeting him. And it made me think, does he regenerate? Like, what is it? It reminded me a lot of in that terrible, awful animated Oz movie we watched, when Patrick Stewart asked them to mercy kill him, and then it doesn't kill him, and so now he's a boat. He's like, oh, he's a tree, and then he asks to be cut down and turned into a boat, and then he's still alive when they're riding around in his body. Yeah, he has so little to do. I was a little upset, honestly, that you almost kind of teased me with panty rating the college Animal House days, The Thing, when he was in his college years. In his memories, he's still The Thing.
Come on, Reed, we gotta go steal Victor's panties. Like, oh, well, as long as you don't tell Sue, I won't tell Sue, as long as you don't tell her about that thing that you're doing for the general.
Okay. Yeah, you cut back to Michael Chiklis in the old days, and he's got like hair, and he looks like John Belushi from Animal House, and he's like, hey. That's more of a Rodney Dangerfield impression. Whoa, okay. That's a different going back to college movie called Back to School. Very, very, very different from Animal House. But yeah, he has so little to do in this movie. He just kind of, I guess he and Kerry Washington are doing fine. We barely got to know her in the last movie, but they're very happy with each other. So that's cool, I guess. Kerry Washington has about as much to do as The Thing in this movie.
Her character trait is that she's blind?
Yeah. What were you saying after we were talking about Ben, and then before you were talking about Dr. Doom?
Wow, I'm sorry, I can't remember. Let's see. I mean, I said that, like, in the comics, I could maybe buy occasionally Victor.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I think I remember now. So these movies seem really high on Human Torch as a character. Like, if I had to guess, I would say Tim Story's favorite member of the Fantastic Four is the Human Torch, because he's given all the personality. He's generally pretty central to, like, the drama of what's going on, or at least he's, like, instigating, like, pretty consistent comic relief. And then this one, like, he does get his own, like, subplot where he's trying to woo an army girl. But the weird, like, so you're right, like, Johnny Storm being able to absorb and swap powers with the other members of the Fantastic Four, that all feels like if this was an issue of a comic book, this would be a fun subplot to have. But in this movie, it's pretty much just a gag for a while, and then at the end he can basically, it's just here so he can become Super Skrull, which doesn't even make sense with the movie that you've been watching. Like, the inner logic of the movie just kind of stops so that they can have him have all of the powers of the Fantastic Four at the same time.
Yes,
because shouldn't Mr. Fantastic or Invisible Woman or the Thing or all of them at once gain fire powers, and then he gets theirs or something?
Exactly, yeah. Like, the way it's worked prior to the final scene is that if he and the Thing touch, then they swap powers. But we've never seen all of them touch him at once, so we don't know how that's going to work. Like, in theory, Johnny should just be able to stretch. Sue should have fire powers now. Reed should be the Thing, and, like, it should be, back and forth. Like all of them have swapped powers, but it does, like, because the movie, like, I was looking at the trivia, and apparently, this was, like, an idea Tim Story had, but he was originally going to have it be Reed who suggests this, and then he decided to change his mind and say, no, it needs to be Johnny who comes up with this. But unless we see them actually testing this earlier, it makes no sense here. It just comes out of nowhere that this is how the power swapping thing works.
It just feels like a way to like reference Super Scroll
Yeah.
or something, and it does make this as a Fantastic Four movie feel massively unsatisfying because if you're a team movie, if you're a team superhero movie, it generally helps if like the team works together to stop the bad guy.
Hmm.
And that doesn't happen in this movie. They all give their powers to Johnny, and then he beats up Doctor Doom, and then then Galactus is defeated by the Silver Surfer just exploding, and it's like, oh, so Reed basically didn't do anything for the last 20 minutes of this movie except fly like a space dodge or a sky dodge, and Sue did basically nothing in the last 20 minutes except die. And then Ben basically did nothing in the last 20 minutes except climb into a crane in record time. It should be noted. So like that by the way, that little gag of him climbing into a crane to like knock out Doctor Doom, that feels like a reshoot if I've ever seen one. Like it's so weird. It's like when you watch SNL and they integrate separate footage into like a movie trailer or something. Yeah, no, as a Fantastic Four movie, it's greatly unsatisfying. What you were talking about, like, oh, let's say Mr. Fantastic is now the thing, and Ben is invisible, and like you know what I'm saying, like you do like all of that, and they all swap powers like one over. That would be fun.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, now they've got to take out the bad guy with another team member's powers. Like that would be fun. But it doesn't happen. But then lastly, what you were talking about was that you're getting into Doctor Doom. But before we get to him, and that's like kind of one of the issues I have with this, is like these fun, potentially wacky concepts in this movie. They should either just be gags and with callbacks later, or you need to take them like more seriously and think them through a little bit more if they're going to be integral to what ends up happening. Because Johnny Storm, like, has the whole powers thing, and then it's treated as a gag, and then it's like the eureka moment where they realize, oh, this is what we need to do to stop the bad guy. And then the second he helps Silver Surfer go back into space, then like I guess they all get each other's powers back, and then like that power swapping goof just stops.
Yeah.
So what if, now hear me out here, Comics Kid, what if Johnny Storm gets stuck as Super Skrull, basically?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what if that's how this kind of ended off? Then you'd go, oh, that's unusual. I wonder how that's gonna plan out. It's like, oh, well, the movie's over. They all get their powers back at the end.
Yeah. And like what I was saying earlier, if this was a comic book storyline, I could see them doing that for a few issues. Like, now Sue has Johnny's powers and she's struggling to like, man, I never realized Johnny had to constantly keep his body temperature down or else he might set this pile of napkins on fire, something like that. And then, Johnny is like, man, like Sue, like she makes it look so easy using her powers offensively and I'm always like struggling with force fields, something like that. Like you could see them kind of get in each other's heads a little bit of like, oh, I didn't realize that it was, and then like you could play around with it a little bit, or like, Reed might have fire powers and he might find something new to do, and Johnny's like, I never thought of that, and you could do that for a few issues, but in a movie it's like, well, we got to restore the status quo, and like you said, for no particular reason, Johnny is back to normal at the end because the movie's over, and I guess the Silver Surfer knew that, so he fixed Johnny when Johnny was pushing his surfboard. And you're right, yeah, that's a clumsy way to handle that subplot ending.
And then alternately, I'm really confused by the movie, where the movie comes down on the wedding. They're in the middle of the wedding when Silver Surfer shows up and just starts like blowing up stuff at their wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And then so, oh my God, Reed just starts like doing stuff that is so irritating to me, where it's like, why are you on your phone at your wedding? Like, stop. That's like so annoying. He's like always just like, duh, and he's like on his phone constantly. He's basically, a year later, or in the same year, you'd have like comedies or like, movies for old people where it's like young people are just addicted to phones. So they're just like, I'm on my phone constantly. I don't know anything. I'm just on my phone. And except that's what Reed is in this movie. And it's like, that's just something I hate looking at on a TV screen.
Mm-hmm.
and that's just like the trait of the main character. Now, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to find that as a funny gag. I'm supposed to find it annoying as Sue does. I guess I do. I don't know if it's supposed to be one of those things where it's like, hey, it's just his job. Hey, he's got to be on his phone for his job. And then Reed is a really busy guy, and he's trying to save the world. And this just seems to annoy Sue more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, and it seems like Reed is like always terrified to tell Sue anything because he thinks it's gonna like annoy her or something. And I'm thinking, why are you getting married to this woman?
Yeah.
Like, why? And then so when they're at the wedding, it's like he's just kind of being this obnoxious, like, oh, I'm on my phone at the wedding altar. Can we hurry this up? And then the Silver Surfer blows some stuff up, and like that whole thing is treated as like Reed being like, oh, he's letting now his work is affecting his personal life, like now his wedding is being compromised by his work. And so then at the end of the movie, now there's a little bit of role reversal. Now Sue's the one saying, oh, we better hurry this up. Like, what has made Sue have this realization? Like, why is Sue all of a sudden seeming now to like kind of like being a superhero? She's talked not at all about being a superhero this entire movie.
When they're walking down the streets in China after the destroyer has been destroyed, both Reed and Sue seem to agree that, like, well, it was because of all of us together that we defeated this thing. Well, first of all, you four didn't do jack crap. The Silver Surfer is the one who defeated the destroyer, and it was Johnny with your four powers who defeated Doom, but the only reason Doom was awake from being turned into a statue was because of the Silver Surfer. And so, like, you four did very little. You captured the Surfer, and then the Surfer, I guess, fell in love with Sue and changed his mind about destroying however many billions of lives up until now. But, like, at the end, they're like, well, if it wasn't for us four, the world would be destroyed. And I'm like, I mean, I guess, but I think you skipped a few steps there, and like you're giving yourself a little more credit. And so they're like, yeah, we have to be the Fantastic Four in order to keep doing this. But like, and so then Sue, I guess, is like, yeah, we have to go. Stuff is always going to be happening. But like you said, Reed on his phone, and it's like, you brought your phone to your wedding, okay, but even if Reed didn't bring his phone to the wedding, Silver Surfer would have still come and, like, wrecked everything. Like, for some reason, he flies through their wedding, and then Johnny chases him, and then, like, 3 seconds later, they're at the Washington Monument, which is, I checked, 3 hours from New York City. And so, like, no, even if Reed hadn't done this behind Sue's back, the Silver Surfer still would have come and messed everything up.
He came because Reed had built that thing.
Really?
Yeah, they say that weird generator he made, or that sensor he had built, that drew like the Silver Surfer to that place to begin with.
In the forest or at the wedding?
At the wedding.
Oh, because I thought the generator he built was in outer space. Like we saw him push a button, and then there's like a satellite in space that like does something, and then all he had at the wedding was his phone. So I'm confused.
Well, their wedding is at the Baxter Building. It's on the roof, and then like he's somewhere in the lab, and that's when Ben is like, "Hey yo, dog, hey yo, dog, Mr. Fantastic, what's the big deal, dog? We gotta get you married, bro. Hey, you know what I'm saying, man?" It's like,
it sounds like Sylvester Stallone is trying to play a teenager.
That's Joey Diaz. He's a comedian, and the Thing basically sounds exactly like Joey Diaz in this movie. But the Thing shows up, and he's like, "Hey, you're getting married in an hour, dude. What are you doing?" He's like, hold on. I'll just gotta turn this generator on. And he kind of is like in the middle. He's like, all right, General, it's going online in an hour or in 3 hours, or turning it on now. He has like that whole thing to the General.
Mm-hmm.
And I assume we keep cutting to it throughout the wedding. I think that's because it's in the Baxter Building, and
okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay. So that's
sort of like, him putting all of his time and effort into his work is kind of what caused the wedding to go south. It's not just him on his phone. It's like the phone represents his work life.
And you're right, like Reed. Well, and so here's what's weird about this. Okay, so Reed is at his bachelor party, and I'm gonna call him Captain Holt. That's who I know this actor as. Andre Bauer, I think, is his name, but he plays in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. But Captain Holt comes and he's like, we need you to do something for us. And Reed says, no, I can't. I'm getting married this Saturday. And then Captain Holt is like, well, I'm disappointed in you. And Reed says, other people can build this generator for you. He mentions Jeff Wagner, and I'm looking on the Internet Movie Database, Connor. Jeff Wagner is credited, but I don't remember seeing this actor in this movie. But we have another Twin Peaks connection that must have been in a deleted scene. Kenneth Welsh played Dr. Jeff Wagner. I do not remember seeing him in the movie, but Reed mentions him. He says Jeff Wagner can build this generator, and then Captain Holt is like, and then he and Sue kind of have a lovey-dovey moment, and then literally the next scene that Reed is in, he's building the generator on the down low for the general, and so I'm confused, like, did Reed decide that Jeff Wagner isn't competent enough to build it? And so he said, I'll help you, General, just don't tell my wife. I only said that in front of her to make her happy. She's a real battle axe, the old ball and chain over here. Is that what's going on? Or did Jeff Wagner look at the schematics and say, I can't build this. You're going to have to go back to Dr. Richards. Because I think the movie could have made me be a little bit more on Reed's side if or maybe the general could have said, we already tried Dr. Wagner. We tried everyone. You are the only person who can do this, Richards. Like, in the comics, you have, like, your normal smart people, which is what I felt like Reed was at the beginning of the first movie. He's not, like, the smartest human on the planet. He's smart. He's, like, in Mensa, but he's not, like, several leagues ahead of the other smartest people on the planet. But then in this movie, suddenly it's like, he's closer to his comic book counterpart, who is, like, you've got him, Tony Stark, Bruce Banner, Victor maybe. They're, like, the smartest people in the universe. Hank Pym, Amadeus Cho, like, these people are, like 10 billion times smarter than other humans. And so, like, if something is wrong, then Reed has to devote his time to it because if he doesn't do it, no one else can. But I never got that feeling that he was that smart in the movie universe, and now suddenly this movie is treating him like he is that smart. And so he has to build the generator thing, even though he mentioned Jeff Wagner, but Jeff Wagner, for whatever reason, doesn't build it, and Reed is building it in the very next scene. Unless you wanted to say Reed does have a problem, and he can't put his work aside even for personal reasons. He says he will, but then he starts to think about it, he's like, well, I could do it real quick and easy. Like, either way, like, the movie needs to make up its mind if that is what is going on with Reed.
You're right. This is like one of those things where Reed is such a frustrating main character to watch because he will, in front of his wife and his friends and all of that, just be like, I have principles. By the way, it's really funny when, like, the general's like, I expected more from you, Reed.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, but it's my wedding day, though.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's, at this point, they don't know that the world's at stake. So, cut him some slack.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. And so, but then it's like he's like working behind his like wife's back and he's like trying to hide information, or his fiance's back. He's like trying to hide stuff from her. It's like, why are you doing this, dude? Like, don't. Like, if you can't communicate with your fiance, maybe this is telling of something.
Mm-hmm.
And oh my God, then, like, you had said that for like a little over half this movie, they're contemplating maybe breaking up the Fantastic Four and just moving to the suburbs. And you're right, time-wise, that is a subplot that encompasses about half of the movie. It is only about one scene, though.
Right.
And that felt like the most juvenile, like, writing trick ever. That's like something I'd expect to see on like a second-rate TV network. And so they have a conversation about potentially breaking up the Fantastic Four. Johnny overhears it and immediately stomps over to Ben and is like, they're breaking us up. Then the next scene, they're like, oh, wow, hey, yo, dog, when are you planning on telling us that you're breaking up the Fantastic Four, dog? And so it's like, how about that? What Reed should have said was, well, that was a private conversation. It's none of your business. And it was simply an idea that was brought up because we're trying to have a family. You idiot! You should know this because, like, you're married, right? Like, has this not been a conversation you've had with your wife? Like, or at least maybe considered having with your wife? Like, that should be the conversation, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, what were you gonna say?
Oh, Captain Holt has one of my favorite moments in the movie where he says, "What is wrong with you people?" And even though we're supposed to dislike this guy, I was like, "Yeah, what is wrong with these people?" Like he's right because they're all acting like children here.
Hmm. And then the ending of the movie is Johnny Storm getting all of their powers and beating up a bad guy. That should be all the ammunition Reed and Sue have for. Well, yeah, I mean, you guys are more of a solo act.
Hmm.
You took care of our powers problem, so we don't really necessarily have the responsibility. All right, deuces, bye. That should be what what their response is. But you're right. Somehow this means they don't want to break up the Fantastic Four anymore.
Hmm.
What?
This is I know we're bouncing all over the place, but I wrote my notes kind of out of order, but getting back to where they were at the bachelor party and Captain Holt hands the photographs of the Silver Surfer to Reed, and Reed says, "I've never seen anything like it before, Ben," and Ben Ben says, "Well, it's not a meteor. It's the look at the tail. It's all different." And I'm like, wait a minute. Ben knows more about the science in this scene than Reed? Like, because Reed literally says, "I've never seen anything like it before," and then hands the photos to Ben, and Ben has more of an explanation than Reed does. I thought that was funny. But yeah, thematically, I think this movie is not working. Like this, if you're gonna do a story about like we're stronger together than we are apart, you need to get rid of all of this stuff about Johnny having all the powers at the end. Like visually, I guess it's a fun idea, but that needs to be something in a movie where they're not contemplating breaking up the team and then rejecting that idea.
Yes. You keep saying like Captain Holt. And
Yeah.
at first I thought you said Captain Hulk.
Oh.
Uh, uh, now I want to see this guy playing the Hulk as a military captain. We can talk more about the plot now because do you want to get into Doctor Doom? Like we can get into just like kind of boring plot mechanics because, geez, this is rough.
I don't have much to say about Doctor Doom other than, I mean, the movie doesn't need to bring him back. He shows up and he tells them that the Silver Surfer's power comes from his board, and then he betrays them, and then they punch him a little bit, and then the Silver Surfer saves the day. So like, I, I guess they're doing this like, hey, it worked so well in X2. Let's do it here. And I think Blade 2, Blade teams up with some vampires. So, that's a tried and true trope for sequels. So we've got to do it here. But, I mean, I wasn't feeling Julian McMahon as Doctor Doom in the first one, but at least he served a purpose in that story. I feel like people like to do fan edits of movies. You almost could cut him from this movie. It'd be about an hour and 10 minutes long, but you could cut him, and the plot wouldn't really change that much.
Yeah, so Captain Holt is the dumbest person in the history of movies in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so, okay, let's backtrack a little bit. Dr. Doom, I guess, was delivered to Latveria, as promised in the last movie.
Mm-hmm.
So he shows up, and then he wakes up. How is he still alive? I don't know, but he is. And then he's sitting in a chair looking at monitors in the dark, and he notices the Silver Surfer. And I guess just by looking at it, he's able to deduce a lot of things about it. He knows where it's going to be. And then he shows up in Greenland. And then he says, "Listen to me." And then that's because he goes to Greenland because this is the place. So a part of the Silver Surfer process is I'm going to make big hole around. That's just what I do. And so the Doctor Doom realizes, oh, this is the next place that he is going to put a hole in the ground. And so then he shows up at Greenland where the Silver Surfer is in the process of putting a hole in the ground. And then Doctor Doom says, "Listen to me." And then Silver Surfer says, "No." And then Doctor Doom shoots some lightning at him. And then the Silver Surfer like blasts him with energy, Space Force energy or whatever. And then what this does is it basically gives the makeup department a hand so he can just look like Julian McMahon and not be a weird, deformed, creepy looking like monster.
Yeah.
And but he still has lightning powers. So it really ticks all the boxes. So I guess he must have gotten into contact with the general guy, Captain Hulk. He must have like been like, "Hey, what's up? Bring me in." Or General or Captain Hulk or whatever his name is. Did he just know? How does he know Doctor Doom is still alive? After the first movie, why would he go to him? Mm-hmm. Why didn't he just go to him before going to Reed? Because like from the beginning of the movie, he doesn't like Reed. and he seems to like Doom okay. So why did you even like bring Reed in to study the Silver Surfer to begin with? It's
Yeah.
pretty convenient. This is all happening after Doctor Doom is no longer like a scary looking monster man. Like this is, oh my god, this is like the plot mechanics where like my brain starts to break down a little bit.
Yeah, and there's like one blink and you miss it line of dialogue where the Thing is explaining to either Johnny or Sue how the General knows Reed, because Reed had worked with the General on something, and then Reed testified in court that whatever it was they were working on was a bad idea, and so the General doesn't like Reed because of that. Okay, fine. And I guess Doom goes to the General off screen to say, "Look what I've got," which, I mean, really, if the General did have a brain, he would say, "Thank you for this information. Now you're going to prison forever. Goodbye." Because once he tells them that the power comes from his board, he doesn't offer anything else. He has nothing else for them. And he doesn't help build the thing that he promised he would help build. And so...
Thing. He said the Thing.
If we were playing a drinking game, we'd both be passed out right now. The movie wants him to be here, but the movie can't think of a good thing for him to thing. A movie can't think of anything for him to do, like other than like he tells them that the power comes from the board, and then he just sits around looking creepy, and he says like, "General, I promise I'm not going to betray you. What about the board?" And then Frankie says, "Oh, we've got it over there in that room. Don't worry." And I'm thinking, why would you tell him that? And then he says, "General, I would like to experiment on the board." And it's like, okay. And so he lets him, and he says, "But I'm going to watch you." He says, "Okay, General, by the way, Reed was right." and then...
Okay, so... sorry, continue.
Oh, when Doom is talking to the Silver Surfer, you might want to, I don't know if you are going to want to go back and rewatch this scene. I was getting some Gene Hackman vibes from that. Like, the dialogue from him it sounded like Gene Hackman saying, like, "Are you the old man?" Like, from Superman 2. Like, his voice sounds different when he's the Phantom of the Opera than when he's regular sexy Victor. Like, it sounded, and I don't know why this time it popped in my head, but I was really getting a Gene Hackman vibe from him when he had the hood over his head, and he kind of looks like, I don't know, kind of looks like the Phantom of the Opera. But yeah, that one scene, I was like, did they get someone else to voice over him here?
He really gets to cut loose and be theatrical, comics kid.
Yeah.
So, oh my god. So the second act, so I'm Doctor Doom. Here's my evil plan. I am going to look at Silver Surfer. I guess I accidentally get zapped by him. Somehow he's able to deduce that the power comes from the board. So then he teams up with the government and the Fantastic Four by extension for some reason, because I guess Latveria doesn't have a military, I guess. But then he decides, oh yes, we're going to collaborate with Mr. Fantastic, and instead of having maybe like a fun scene where because Victor Von Doom is supposed to be a smart guy too, you could maybe have a scene where they're like kind of trying to do a little bit of one-upsmanship of who's the smarter guy.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen in this movie. No, what ends up happening is Doctor Doom does nothing.
Mm-hmm.
He just sits in another room and then takes credit for the Fantastic Four, coming up with a way of like subduing the Silver Surfer. And then once oh my god, then there's this really embarrassing scene where Reed tells off the generals like, "Yeah, in high school you were the quarterback, but I went to class because I was a nerd. But now I'm one of the biggest brains in the world, and I'm married to the hot chick. So listen to me because I'm a quarterback too." And like this just feels like the nerd in high school finally gets a chance to write about how cool he is now, and it's just so bad. And then after this, when they're like, that's in the woods because this is a Fox film, so it takes place in the woods, and then they're in the woods because this is the place where the Silver Surfer is going to make a crater in the ground, another one, while the Fantastic Four are in the process of trying to subdue the Silver Surfer. Silver Surfer shows up, and then like he blows up the military stuff, right? They try shooting a missile at him, and then he's like, "Oh, you're throwing a missile at me, military? Well, boom, now you're all blown up," right? Mm-hmm. He does this, and then somehow the general is still alive. I don't know how. Frankie is still alive. I don't know how. And Victor Von Doom is still alive. I don't know how. They were all standing at that military place with all the vehicles, and like the Silver Surfer blew them all up, right? Like how how did that happen? It's like a Looney Tunes. Like they have like no soot or ash or like anything on them. The Fantastic Four are the ones who subdue like the Silver Surfer, but for some reason Victor gets credit for it. I don't know how. And then they go to Siberia, and then like, oh my, the scene in Siberia is like a 4-year-old wrote it. So they go to Siberia, and then they say, "Sorry, Fantastic Four, you gotta stay inside the waiting room, but Victor Von Doom will come with us. He gets to see how the sausage is made. By the way, thank you for upholding your side of the bargain, Victor." He's like, "Yes, I delivered on my side of the bargain." He's like, Victor Von Doom has done nothing. You're right. You could cut him out of this. He has shown up, played a video, and sat in another room while everyone else did the work. Sat around and didn't get blown up somehow by the Silver Surfer while the Fantastic Four actually did the work. And now the General's like, "Well, Reed called him the quarterback, so now he doesn't get to hang out with us." And it's like, Victor Von Doom is not a jock. He was probably a nerd in high school too. So I don't get why you. Oh my. By the way, speaking of which, you were right. When you were talking about like there's a backstory alluded to where they were in court and Reed testified against them. This is now the second movie in a row we're talking about where a scientist was in a courtroom and was speaking against the military. This was a plot point in Evolution as well.
Oh yeah.
And it just keeps going deeper. So the reason the General is like so I've already explained a couple of reasons why he's like a complete moron. But like earlier they go to London and then the Fantastic Four have to like figure out a way to like not have the big famous Ferris wheel fall over, and then they kind of screw up a little bit. There's a little bit of power swapping shenanigans, but nobody dies, right? Like they're able to kind of take care of the situation, and then for some reason the General's like, "This was a complete disaster. We're bringing in someone else." It's like, why? Why would you do like? What did they do? Nothing happened. Like you couldn't have saved any of those people, General. They had a minor error, but I think they did a pretty good job. That's why, like in that scene, if that's going to be the fallout of it, then they should have failed. But they didn't fail. Sorry, I'm jumping way back. But sorry, jumping back to Siberia. Then Victor Von Doom's like, "Yes, I have held my side of the bargain. Now let me now uphold your side. Let me have tests, do tests on the board." It's like, wait, we had no idea. I had no idea this was like a part of their deal, and it's part of their deal for some reason. And then he goes in there to like do tests on the board, and the General guy is like, "Well, you can only do it under my supervision." And I guess they're in the middle of doing it now, even though they should be questioning the Silver Surfer in the other room, and they're not doing that for some reason. Well, they're doing it so it's dramatically convenient for Sue to like leave the waiting room and have a conversation with the Silver Surfer while the General's otherwise preoccupied. But then what happens is, like, Frankie has that line where she says, and to anyone listening who's not familiar, Frankie is just like the army chick that Johnny wants to get in the pants of. So then Frankie's like, "Oh yes, the board is being held inside of a tube that is like constantly like disrupting it, right?" And then like Doom says, "Reed was right. I'm a bad guy. Blah blah." And then he like has this thing on his gauntlet, like he has this thing on his arm where he like goes like beep beep boop boop, and then the board just like phases out of it. Like I thought the whole point of it was that it was under containment; it couldn't go anywhere. And furthermore, wait a minute, have you already done tests on the board? Victor, how do you have technology that's compatible with the board?
Yeah.
Like why is any of this happening? I feel like my brain is like burning. And then furthermore, so we established that there is a camera inside the waiting room that like the Fantastic Four are locked in, and then they have like the most like if we would be calling them a group of Karens if they were all women, because like what's his face? Reed says, "Are we prisoners?" It's like, are you kidding me? You're being held in a waiting room. Like you're comparing yourself to being a prisoner. But then I guess there isn't a camera inside the interrogation room where the Silver Surfer is being held. Like, because nobody, like, you would think that Sue showing up and then turning herself non-invisible to talk to, like, the what's his face, the Silver Surfer, like some security guard would see that on like a computer or like, a monitor. So it's like, why did we even establish that there are cameras in this facility if like the Fantastic Four are going to just like blatantly do things that would show up on a camera and that doesn't come back? Like, oh my, I feel like I've been talking for like maybe 20 minutes.
Yeah. I don't have a whole lot to say about the Siberia stuff other than like, what Captain Holt, he says like, make sure these people stay in here comfortably or whatever. And then like Johnny opens the door and says like, can we have some popcorn and stuff? And like one of them has the ability to turn invisible. And so like this guy I guess just completely forgot about that. And then she goes and instead of like sneaking into the room, like she does sneak in there, but at first she's in the hallway and she turns the wall invisible so that she can look in there. But I think that the torture scientist was still in there, and so I'm curious why he didn't like, whoa, the wall's invisible right now, huh? That's weird. um, yeah. To get to some of the other things I had on the notes, so Johnny's whole arc is that he wants to find a woman to settle down with. But why does he want to settle down with the soldier lady? Because he starts, and I guess this is one of those things where it's like he flirts with her and she's not interested, and that just makes him want to flirt harder. But then, like, the movie is acting like, oh, she's really special, and Johnny thinks he's found the one. But why? Like, we don't know anything about her, and she kind of, she doesn't fall for his guff, and so maybe that kind of, that's like, oh, like I need somebody who won't put up with my nonsense. But still, we don't know anything about her, and I think we're expected to care about her because she is a character in the comics. I don't know if you knew this, but there is a second or third or fourth, I don't know. She's a Herald of Galactus, and she calls herself Nova, unrelated to the Nova Corps and Richard Rider, that Nova, but she is one of the Heralds of Galactus introduced in the John Byrne run. And so I guess because she has a name that is from the comics, we're supposed to care who she is, but all we know about her is that she doesn't like Johnny and his cowboying around. And she's right that, Johnny very easily could have gotten some people killed earlier. But like you said, the military didn't do anything in this scene. Like, this reminds me of the movie Batman and Robin, where the commissioner is mad at Batman for letting someone go. And it's like, yeah, but it's your job to do it. Like, he's a guest of yours. And like, the Fantastic Four are here because you asked them to. And then when they don't, and they, at that point when the Ferris wheel thing is falling apart, they don't have a way of containing the Silver Surfer yet. They know that he's going to be there, but they don't build the containment thing until after that. And so it's really weird to me that they even, like, they go in there without a plan. I don't know what they thought was going to happen, what a successful version of that scene would have been, but they didn't think of the generator thing until, I'm pretty sure, after the Ferris wheel scene. I feel like Johnny's arc, instead of being, I need to find a woman to settle down with, it should be, if you are so in love with being part of this team, then you need to act like you're part of this team. Because it is Johnny's fault that the Ferris wheel thing almost, like, he flies into Reed somehow. I don't know how he bumps into Reed, but when he sees the surfer, he jumps after him, bumps into Reed, swaps powers with Reed, and so then the Ferris wheel starts to fall. And so if Reed should have had a conversation with him where he said, like, you're saying that we don't need to take the Fantastic Four apart. In that case, you need to actually act like you're part of this team instead of just going off on your own whenever you feel like it. And I think that could have been a good character arc for him.
Yeah, it could have. I think Chris Evans kind of continues to be the strong point of, like, the core ensemble as far as acting goes. Johnny's, kind of an annoying character, but he might honestly look the best out of, like, all of them in this movie. And I've talked about Reed and Sue being just, like, terrible, but like, Ben has like psychopathic anger tendencies. and I feel like, Chris Evans, like, he wants to settle down with somebody, but he kind of wants to project like he's cool being a playboy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, there's something there, I think, in, like, the performance. But yeah, I don't understand, like, what about, like, this lady that he finds so appealing. I mean, like, yeah, like, she's hot, but like, that's like his whole thing is like he hangs out with the hot babes, and that's all he does.
Mm-hmm.
So
I wonder if it would have worked better if, when the military comes to the bachelor party, if Johnny was like, Frankie, hey, I haven't seen you since I dropped out of college, and she'd be like, oh no, Johnny, like, okay, hey, like, if they had known each other before, that would have worked a little better, I think.
Yeah, it would have been a little contrived, but it would have been a lot better.
Yeah.
And I mean, it would have led to probably some great Chris Evans in college outfit photos.
Where he's got the hat slightly to the side.
Yeah.
And, And then we can
He's got a
see the
striped
photo
polo
from
shirt.
the
Yeah.
first movie.
Yeah. Oh man.
The
And there could be like some ironic twist to it where he's like setting like a candle on fire or something. It's like, oh, get it? He becomes the torch.
The only notes I had left are basically about Galactus and the Silver Surfer and like timeline of this movie. So I have not read the original three-part story that introduces the Silver Surfer and Galactus. I'll go ahead and tear a corner off my comic book card. I haven't read that storyline, so I don't know how the Silver Surfer was introduced there. But I have read the original Silver Surfer series from the late 60s, and in that, Norrin Radd, he's an alien from another world, and he volunteers to become Galactus' herald to spare his planet and his girlfriend Shalabal. And so then he says, I'm going to go around and I'll find planets for you to eat. But then if he finds a planet that has sentient life on it, then he says, nope, it can't be this planet. I got to find another one. Like, that's his whole thing in the Silver Surfer series. Now, I don't know how it's portrayed when he's first introduced, because obviously something had to have changed in between, like, him becoming the herald to find Galactus worlds that he can eat and him coming to Earth. But here we're told that Norrin, basically, he makes a bargain with this big cloud and says, don't destroy my planet and I will find worlds for you. But then he just, like, Galactus comes and eats every world that he finds. So what does Galactus have to gain by turning Norrin Radd into his herald here? Like,
I have no idea.
Unless it's like Galactus was having a hard time finding these giant cosmic bodies called planets. Like, you know, we puny cavemen on Earth, we invented telescopes that show us other worlds. Like, surely he can just, oh, here's one I haven't eaten. Like, he doesn't need the Silver Surfer. And so that is really weird. And then the Silver Surfer comes, and while it's not spelled out for us, I think what he's supposed to do is he is supposed to make all these holes in the planet to make it easier for Galactus to suck the juice out of the planet. But why does that take him 8 days? Again, he went from New York City to the Washington Monument in like 10 seconds. Why does it take him 8 days to make all these craters? All he does, because at one point Reed says all of these worlds, the anomaly started, and then 8 days later they were destroyed. All the Silver Surfer is doing is basically alerting these people, hey, something really weird is going on. And if he did all this in 24 hours, which with his speed I think he could have, then they wouldn't have had enough time to figure out that the Destroyer is coming. But because it takes him over a week, or at least that's what Reed says on these other worlds, then that gives the Fantastic Four, even with all their bungling, that gives them enough time to figure out what's going on and how they can stop it. But also, the movie doesn't feel like it takes 8 days. It feels like it takes 2 or 3 days, maybe. Like, there's the bachelor party, and then he says, we're getting married this Saturday, and then we cut to that, and he built the thing in that time, and so the anomalies have already started, and since he says, I'm getting married this Saturday, that presumably means that he's not talking to the general on a Friday. Otherwise, he would have said, I'm getting married tomorrow. So maybe it's Thursday, maybe it's Wednesday, we don't know. But some undetermined amount of time passes. But even so, it doesn't feel like 8 days have happened since the anomaly started. And I guess part of the problem is we open with the Silver Surfer showing up on Earth and starting the anomalies, and then we cut to the Fantastic Four are in an airport, and we don't know how much time has passed since the anomaly started. So it could be that we're already like 3 days into it, because Reed says oh, these people, there's anomalies happening and they're worried about our China patterns. And so like maybe it's already been going on, but even so, what we are told, I don't think lines up with what we are shown. Maybe it does make sense and I'm just not giving, maybe it did when you count all the time before we see the Fantastic Four and all the time before their wedding. Maybe it is about 8 days, but it seems like it's not working out like that.
You're right. Like it does try to favor being more fast paced over anything else, and that makes it feel like less than 8 days. Because you're right. Like there was like it's ambiguous at the beginning how much time has passed before Silver Surfer arriving and the military alerting the Fantastic Four. But if that's the case, man, this is the slowest military in the history of movie militaries.
What did you think of Galactus being a giant cloud?
It's something I already knew about. It's kind of infamous about this movie. I think it's really dumb. it's one of those things where it's just like it's a space cloud that eats planets. Okay, I don't really know a whole lot about Galactus from comic books very much. I know he's like he eats planets or whatever. With this though, it's just kind of like it struck me as they had no interest in making a Galactus movie. They thought Silver Surfer was cool, so they want to do stuff with Silver Surfer. They don't really care about Galactus.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like I said earlier, this was in that era where the people making the movies weren't sure what they could get away with. If this movie had come out after Guardians of the Galaxy, where you have talking raccoons and talking trees, they might have been a little more willing to have a giant man in a toga who eats planets. But I think you're right. I remember hearing rumors that they were going to do a third Fantastic Four movie and a spin-off Silver Surfer movie. I have no idea how that would have worked. As soon as credits started rolling, I turned this off this time, but I think maybe there was a post-credit scene where Silver
There's
Surfer...
a sequence like 5 seconds after some credits start rolling.
Okay. And it's Silver Surfer like flying towards the screen, like, oh, he survived.
He's like floating in space, but then the board kind of floats into the screen.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, like, Silver Surfer, I have nothing against the character in the comics, but I don't know what you could do with him if he's stuck on Earth. Like, you would have to get him onto an alien world and do something like Thor Ragnarok, like, do something somewhere else. Don't do a Silver Surfer stuck on Earth movie. I would be bored out of my mind with that, unless he's like, the fifth wheel of the Fantastic Four. That would have been weird, and this movie can't even handle 4 characters. I don't know what they would have done with 5, but like I feel like they were like, Silver Surfer guys, and everyone's like, no thanks. But yeah, the getting back to Galactus, there is one part where it's passing Jupiter. And by the way, why isn't Galactus eating Jupiter and every other planet on its way to Earth? Like, because it passes by some of the other planets in the solar system, but we see a shadow that kind of looks like Galactus's helmet. And so I think a theory, I guess, from people who want to defend this movie is that Galactus is in the cloud and we just don't see him. But I'm kind of torn between, like, how in the world is Silver Surfer able to bargain with a cloud? And like, this came out at the time, at the time they weren't going to be able to get away with Galactus as he's portrayed in the comics. So I'm kind of torn between, like, yeah, I get it, but also it's still really silly.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where it's like, just if you're gonna do it, then you do it. Or like, what is inherently more silly about a big space thing that is coming to get you than like a silver man that makes holes in the ground?
Yeah,
exactly. You know what I mean? Like it's not that. It's like in for a penny per pound, go for it, right? Like,
yeah, good point. Yeah, and like, I don't know, like, that was kind of a problem with a lot of superhero movies in this era, where it's like, well, we're gonna just kind of put our toes in the water and see what people think of this, and then, like, Ang Lee's Hulk happens, and a lot of people are like, yeah, that looks really silly, and so then they're like, oh, wait, they don't like it. Batman and Robin happens, and then it doesn't do as well as they like, and so the lesson they take away from that is people don't like colorful. And so we're safer doing a dark cloud than we are a man in a purple toga. And that makes it sound, I've mentioned it like 3 times now, that makes it sound like I'm against Galactus. I'm not. I don't really, I think there's only so many times that you can have Galactus show up where it has any meaning, but doing it once in the movies I think is fine. But at the same time, I can kind of see where they're going, but you're right, like, the Silver Surfer is already pretty far out there, so they could have gone further with it.
What else do you want to cover with this? Because we've been talking for like, what, 2 hours? Jeez.
I don't have.
I'm honestly surprised we were able to get this much out of it.
Yeah, I don't have much more to say. It was, I don't hate it. I will probably go back and rewatch both of these movies again in the future. I'm surprised we didn't have a higher number on our Fan 4 Stick clock. I did want to say something nice about that movie, since we're probably never going to mention it again. At least that movie does try to give Sue something to do with her studying patterns. It's silly as it can possibly be, but at least she's not just Team Mom in that movie. So I will say that at least it's trying to do something with Sue. I should have mentioned that earlier when we were talking about Sue. But yeah, I will probably watch these two again, just for the nostalgia. They're not great movies. I think that they could have done any number of things to improve both of them, but I still kind of have fun watching them, despite myself.
I hear you. I can understand that.
So I guess that means I need to choose something. I am not prepared, so let me pull up my list and see what we're going to talk about. You know what? I'm going to throw this out there and see if you are okay with this, Connor. I don't know if this movie is streaming anywhere, but have you ever seen the movie The Crow?
I have not.
Okay.
Hold on. I'm gonna look. I think it's on HBO Max.
Oh, okay. That'd be great because The Crow happens to have David Patrick Kelly in it, who he was in Twin Peaks. He was who was he? He was Ben
Jerry
Horns.
Horn.
Yeah. And so that is, and it's I watched this movie once about like 10 years ago, and then I watched it again a few months ago, and so it's somewhat fresh on my brain. I think you'll probably like it. I've only seen it twice, and I will probably rewatch it again when we talk about it. But I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. This is one that. Well, I won't even say what I was going to say. So we will talk about The Crow next time, and then
Hold on.
hopefully
it should be said it is on HBO Max. So.
Oh, okay, cool. I have it on DVD, but if anyone else is interested in following along, you can catch it on HBO Max. So awesome! I'm glad it's on
This
there.
is one of those iconic superhero movies that I've also not seen. So that's what's cool about this. That's one of those things that can be neat. Is I'm finally catching up on all this homework.
Yeah. I wasn't even thinking of it in terms of superhero. I looked at my list, and I have my list, it's a physical list, but it's divided up into movies and then episodes of TV shows, and this was at the bottom of my movie list, and so I just saw it there, and I was like, okay, let's try that one. So that's what we'll be talking about, and then we'll do that in a couple weeks. In the meantime, I am the Comics Kid 2099.
And I'm Connor Nielsen.
And we'll see you guys in the future. Have a good one.